Absolutely. Pleasure being here.
Yeah. What is up, Kunal Purohit? How's it going?
Well, I wish I could tell you what is in the air, and the good news
It's
is
the
that it is
virus.
not.
That's what it is.
It is not.
The dreadful
Uh,
COVID-19 going into 2020.
absolutely, man. I mean, so there's just as a journalist, I think this is a good time to be around because there's just so much of work to be done, and there's so much of information to be put out. But it's also such a it's such a weird time to be alive because we don't know what's happening. We have no sense of what is coming to get us, and if it is indeed coming to get us. We've been told that the transmission rates here are not as major as they have been in other countries, but we still don't know what's going to happen in the next few weeks.
Right. Yeah. Before we get into the meat of this conversation, which is going to be, getting people to become aware about the sort of news media outlets that they're consuming, the way they're using information around the virus. I would love for you to sort of introduce yourself to the audience and tell them exactly what it is that you do, along with the professional qualifications, whatever it takes.
Absolutely. I mean, so I've been a journalist for about 12, 13 years now, and I'm primarily based out of Bombay.
Right.
I've been reporting on various things. So I started reporting on the city. So I was reporting on city government and urban developmental issues in the city. Then I graduated to reporting on state politics, and then I'm at this point in my career I'm reporting more on national issues. So I don't report on issues around the city anymore, around Mumbai anymore, but I report on things like the right wing politics that we see all around us. So I report a lot from the ground. I travel a lot across the country to smaller towns and villages. I also report a lot on developmental issues in general from across the country. And a big part of my focus is on what's happening with all of these social media networks that surround us and surround our lives in India. And I report on how there is a very concerted disinformation campaign that happens there, and there's also a lot of misinformation. So I report on how that's also taking shape in India. So these are really different strands of my work. I mean, these are my interest areas more like. And I'm also a fellow podcaster. I've got a couple of podcast series that I've brought out. One is called The Night Shift, and the other is called The Last 40 Sons of Bombay. So if I can do a subtle plug, I'd urge your listeners to also go and check them out.
Yes, I would highly advise you guys to do that because I have heard parts of excerpts that you put up on Instagram and they're fantastic. I love the soundtrack. I love just how honest and authentic it is. Yeah, man. To sort of start things off, I have been using the first part of this day in collecting information and WhatsApp forwards from my father, my mother, and all of those people who are susceptible to the great malaise of WhatsApp that is spreading in India. And the messages that I saw shocked me. It was everywhere from, why the virus is somehow related to a 5G network testing that China is doing, and how it's a nuclear weapon slash virus gone wrong, and even stuff about some psychological explanation for Chinese and bats. And this is an attitude that is very fast, very rapidly permeating the psyches of the Indian taxpayers. I mean, I would say, the tier 2 city, tier 1 city, 30 to 50-year-old demographic that I am aware of. How do we even make sense of this? What the hell is happening?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen WhatsApp fake news and disinformation and all of the misinformation that we see. We've seen that happen for a while now, but I think this is a very unique time in our lives. I'd like to see. I think it's for the first time possibly in a very very long time that we are clueless about what is happening. We are still groping in the dark. There is so much that we don't know about this epidemic that's broken out. There's not enough online that we can read up. We can't Google so much of the questions that we have, and we can't find the answers to so many questions that we have. And I think that's possibly causing us to also just seek out whatever feels comfortable or whatever feels convincing enough. Because there is not much evidence anyway, right? So I'd say right from some of the stuff that you mentioned, the conspiracy theories. Now, there are obviously a lot of questions about China's role in containing it and initially in trying to cover up. Now, of course, those could be dealt at one level, but then because there is all of this suspicion, it's now translated into these conspiracy theories about how this is actually a weapon that's been developed by China, and this is a biological warfare situation that's happening, and all kinds of things. I mean, so we also have a lot of videos which are basically talking about how China's killing its own citizens. I mean, I remember there was this very viral forward. I don't know if you saw this, but there was a viral forward which said that China is asking its Supreme Court to, give it permission to kill 20,000 of its own citizens because they've all been infected with the virus, right? So there's also that, and now almost everyone I know around me believed that because they said, oh, it's China, it can do anything it wants, and then that's really just groping in the dark because we don't really have too many answers anymore. So I feel like that's one big part of why disinformation is constantly going viral. So from home remedies to diagnostic tests that WhatsApp tells you to do, to things that you can do to not have the virus. I mean, it's crazy the kind of stuff that's going on. But then there's so many people believing it.
Yeah, I mean, I saw your Twitter blowing up this hardly like 6 to 8 hours ago when you shared a tweet with the screenshot of a WhatsApp that you got that had something to do with how clapping your hands is somehow associated to a Vedic science. Correct me if I'm wrong. Something along those lines, where it was basically some sort of a zealot trying to rationalize the prime minister's attempt at getting people to clap by integrating it in some kind of holistic Ayurvedic idea. I was just dumbfounded by that. I was like, how much time does it take for information to be disseminated on such a mass medium, and then that information gets received by say people who are passionate about certain causes, and then all it takes is writing a paragraph down and then sending it forward, and then it just becomes information. Like, I think you were spot on by saying that whatever is convenient to us is a fact, and whatever we have to dig for is somehow either illogical or not true, or basically something that is again a conspiracy theory. I was surprised to see that my own parents, who I love dearly, continue to believe that it's that this whole issue is manufactured primarily by China because they want to test a virus against India. And I was wondering if how, like, in terms of the work that you do, how true is that?
What part of? I mean, what part of it is true or not?
Like the idea that the Chinese were developing a virus just for the sake of entertaining that.
I mean, here's my two bit. I've sort of been reading all of these conspiracy theories, and I've even tried to get down to sort of understanding what really is the logic driving it, because it's not good enough to just dismiss them as someone's figment of imagination. Here's the thing: I mean, we don't have enough evidence at this point, which is actually documentary evidence, which is grounded in research and facts, to say any of this. So my point is this: we are dealing with an epidemic of a proportion that at least this, everyone who's living right now has possibly not seen. And it's convenient to blame China one way or the other for this, but the truth is, it's not going to make it any easier for us to deal with it. Even if China, did cultivate this as a virus from in its lab and then transmit it to the world, and sort of it got leaked out and killed its own citizens in the process. Which is my argument to a lot of people who are spreading this, that it at this point doesn't make sense. It at this point doesn't add up. The theories don't add up. So what is it that you're trying to then provoke? What is the reaction that you're trying to then elicit from people who are sending it out? Is this just another theory that's just floating in the air and you wanted to send it out because you have a prejudice against the Chinese? And mind you, I mean, we can all raise a lot of questions about China, right? It's not a democracy. It is an authoritarian state. It's clearly done a lot that is wrong in terms of especially dealing with the doctors who first tipped the Chinese authorities off about the virus. This was late December, and we can all talk about this. But, sorry,
what did they do with the doctor?
So, I mean, there were basically a few of these doctors in the epicenter of the outbreak in Wuhan who detected that this was not ordinary. This was not an ordinary case of pneumonia, as had been earlier, because there were a few patients who were admitted and who were infected with this virus, and they were the first ones to actually speak about it, and they did put this up, so they put it up in their in their official correspondence as well. And instead of the government acting on it, the Chinese authorities actually clamped down on these guys and told them to shut up and carry on with business as if it never happened. And and in the process, one of the doctors who was instrumental in keeping them off, was very tragically infected with the virus himself, and then he died. And when he died, a lot of people in China, and China is not known to be a country which takes dissent very easily, but a lot of people inside China also sort of stood up and said that his death was wrong. That the Chinese government shouldn't have penalized him for saying the truth, and had the Chinese government listened to him, that the infection could have been contained. So there's also that aspect of it. I mean, that has also happened. So there's no denying that China has been bad and it's been lax, and it's also been negligent. But these conspiracy theories at this point, with us sitting in India, or in different parts of the world, without field visits, without examining the records that the medical records that come out of it, we will not be able to substantially prove this to be true. Which is why I would say it's a waste of time to right now be floating these conspiracy theories, unless you have any documentary evidence.
Right. Yeah, I believe that as well. In fact, when you were saying that, I was thinking about a couple of friends that I have in the US who happen to be either Chinese American or Korean American, and I asked them about if they've ever encountered any racism after the COVID outbreak, and what they told me surprised me. They're like, we have dealt with everything from slurs to those weird eye stares, because they somehow believe that even though they're Americans, because of the way they look, they're somehow responsible for the virus. So, despite the fact that China, suppressed this fact to save face internationally, considering that it was becoming a threat to a lot of superpowers, it's somehow led the rest of the world to demonize China and to somehow also rationalize a degree of racism which wasn't possible, which wasn't as evident before. And that's something you also wrote in your article. I believe that you said something along the lines of the perceptions of Indians for the Chinese has declined to about 29% favorability, something like that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you're spot on when you connect disinformation and the kind of racism that we're seeing. Now, Vinamre, what is happening is exactly this. We are, we have these biases within us. We have this sense of prejudice within us. All it takes sometimes is a push, and that's exactly what this epidemic has done. I mean, because we know that the epidemic is now broken out. All of our biases and all of our prejudice is now coming out, and we're channelizing it in the direction of anyone who we think is responsible for this plight. So there's also that sense of anger. There's a sense of anger amongst us where we're saying, the world was going on fine. Why did China have to do this? As if it was in China's control to have an epidemic of this sort, right? So there's also that people are groping in the dark. People don't seem to get a handle over themselves in an epidemic of this sort, and they tend to blame me. So the idea, I was talking to a sociologist, and he said something very interesting. He's a sociologist from the Mumbai University, Dr. Joseph, and he said this. He said, in times of such uncertainty, the human mind tends to look for enemies.
Right.
Enemies who it can target, enemies who it can sort of channelize its anger on, and that's exactly what the Chinese are for so many of us, right? Because we don't seem to be getting anywhere with understanding the epidemic. It's easier to blame a race or a country for this outbreak and then just move on. So you direct all of your anger towards them, and which is why you see so much of the disinformation and misinformation on WhatsApp and on other social media networks, which is directed at Chinese. So right from calling it like President Trump of the United States called it the Chinese virus, which in my view is an extremely racist comment to make. From him doing that to Indian WhatsApp groups, which are basically circulating. There is this very viral video which is going on WhatsApp and YouTube and Facebook, where there's basically a live animal market, right? So there's a video clip which is about 2 minutes or so, which is going through this animal market, and it's got all kinds of animals. It's got right from dead snakes to rats,
That video.
to bats, all of this, right? And there's a caption which says, "Oh, this is inside the Wuhan market." So the Wuhan market is where they say that the virus first broke out of, right? It's still not scientifically proved yet, but that's the suspicion at least. And they say that this is a clip from that market, when it was still operational, and it says, no wonder the Chinese got the virus because this is what they eat, right? Now, we all sort of tend to think that who eats bats, right? Or who eats I don't know, snakes or rats. But in the inherent thought of trying to separate them from us, what we are doing is we are trying to bring ourselves to a higher level and say, oh, we don't eat all of that stuff. So we're slightly more civilized than they are because they're eating all of that stuff, right? Now people have reservations about the kind of food that the Chinese eat and the kind of meat that they eat. But I believe it is extremely subjective. I mean, what goes on, what is good for you may not be good for me. And that, and having such arguments against the Chinese is really placing us on the same level as people in our own country, who tend to make enemies out of the meat that you eat. So if you eat beef, you're anti-Hindu and you're anti-India, and we all know that's a lot of bullshit. So that's again, which is why I'm saying that's the same yardstick that you're then applying to the Chinese. And I think Indians don't seem to have that sense of irony when they're doing that. So that's one thing. That's one thing that's constantly happening. We're constantly othering, and we're constantly making the Chinese people a target of our collective anger. And that's because we're still very unsure and very uncertain of where we stand right now.
Yeah, it's like the idea of, I think there's a very famous idea in psychology called the in-group out-group theory, where in order to bolster your own membership in a group, you essentially make an out-group and then you exist in a reaction to that. And that's a thread that you will see in basically all cult movements, even in the best of political parties. For every liberal party, there is a conservative party, because the conservative party rose up in reaction to the liberals, in-group, out-group, that sort of thing. But when you push it to the extremes, that's when this sort of malignant behavior, which is happening right now, tends to occur. I was trying to parse through some newspapers for this podcast just to get a feel of like what the print media is covering on this. And I did see stuff about the government sort of issuing directives to Facebook, WhatsApp, and Twitter to sort of try and control the blitz of messages that are coming on. Do you think those practices tend to be successful, or do you think it's too hard to control massive influx of information in a pandemic like this?
I've always been clear about the fact that all of these tech companies, right from Facebook, which owns not just Facebook but also WhatsApp and Instagram, to YouTube, also to Twitter. All of these guys have essentially come forward every single time there's a crisis which involves their networks. They've essentially come forward and said, we can't do much because we've designed a product for a certain type of use, and we can't really help it if people are misusing that platform, right? And then even though they've taken small steps, they've clearly not been enough. And that's really my problem, because we're not really pinning down the responsibility on these social media giants. Here are these guys who are collecting our data, who are raking in the profits using our data, but yet are not really claiming any responsibility or giving us a sense of accountability for what they're taking from us. And I see that as a major failing of all of these guys. For instance, WhatsApp. I mean, WhatsApp says that its messages are supposed to be encrypted end to end, right? Which is why it cannot trace the source back. So the source of any fake news that you see, it will not be able to trace back where it first came from. And my question is this: I mean, did you not anticipate that the product might be misused? And if you did anticipate that, that's a huge failing in terms of product design. Because when you are creating a product which is potentially, I mean, it currently has about over 200 million users in India alone, right? and if it says that it didn't really envisage how it would be misused by other people or how it would be used differently by different communities, then I'd say that you failed at the very conceptual level of your product. So I pin the blame on a lot of these social media companies for what we're seeing right now, and I feel like there are definitely steps that they can take. So one of the things that we've been seeing, and I've been noticing this a lot on Facebook. I don't know if you've noticed this, but a lot of people are sort of putting up status messages saying that they have been banned or their posts have been suspended because they had written something about the coronavirus. And Facebook later sort of claimed, that it was because they had a bug in the website, which was basically essentially just, automatically without really moderating the content, just going on and suspending all the posts which had any mention of the virus. My thing is this: they do have content moderators which are in place, and who are humans now, but they have very few of them personally. And whatever the number that they have, which is also very opaque because Facebook doesn't really open up about this, they're not essentially doing a very good job. And I'll give you a small example for it. Just yesterday, when I was tracking, some of this disinformation around the virus, I came across this video, and Vinamre, you wouldn't believe it, because you're a fellow, creator of content on various social media platforms. But I saw this guy who claimed to be from Meerut, and he was holding up a bottle, a small bottle, a plastic bottle, which was white in color, and he claimed that was the cure for the virus, right? So he claimed that he in his house in Meerut had that cure ready with him, and he only wants to meet the prime minister and give the cure to him because this should be used for people's benefit. Now this guy, he's no doctor. I mean, he mentioned in the video that he's a businessman, and he didn't need a lab for this. He didn't need science for it. He said that he's been drinking this for about 6 years now, and he's been absolutely fine, and this is the cure. Now that video, got about 7.3 million views in the last 3 days itself, right? And it got 17,000 shares on Facebook. And we don't even know what's happening, in the cross exchange. So what's happening with with the number of views that it gets on WhatsApp or what's happening on YouTube, we don't even know that. But this is on Facebook alone, it's got more than 7 million views. Now this is not something that Facebook is taking down, right? And how does that tie in with its measures that it's announced? So there's definitely, you see that there's definitely different standards for different communities, and different standards for different political lineages as well. So if you believe, or if you're part of one political opinion, you will be less penalized than if you're against it. And we see that in the States, we see that in India as well.
Yeah, that takes us to a very interesting conversation about fact checkers and gatekeepers when it comes to these massive social media networks. I remember attending the Harvard India conference in 2019, and they had a whole session on free speech, social media, and censorship. And I remember asking a question from one of the fact checkers for Facebook, YouTube, about why they had banned a certain conservative news outlet from essentially running ads. And this is something I always see. This is a recurring pattern that I see when it comes to even the podcast that Joe Rogan did with Jack, I forgot his name, the Twitter CEO, Jack Dorsey. Even the podcast he did with Jack Dorsey and his communication director, the public policy director, whatever her name was. There's always a sort of language that is used by not all fact checkers, but especially representatives of bigger companies. That is, I would say, it sort of loops around the issue. It never really addresses the question asked of them. Like, for instance, why did you block A, or why did you censor A or B? Usually answers range in the ambiguous. We take it, they'll say something like it's on a case-by-case basis. You have to understand the bigger context. And that sort of language is never clear. There are never clear regulations about what should be blocked, what should be promoted. And I think even the idea of fact-checking, despite our country's education status, as so many of our countries, people know English and are all educated and literate. Even despite that, I think fact-checking as a phenomenon is still very nascent in India. It doesn't have the same. It doesn't have the same framework that the US has or the UK has. And I know for a fact that you have also worked periodically as a fact checker. What are some of the challenges that you might face, and what do you think about the statement I just made about fact checkers?
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. We don't have the culture of of having fact checkers in the newsroom. I mean, I worked in various newsrooms, for a very long time, for a very long part of my career. And I mean, the fact checker was basically the journalist who was writing that piece.
Interesting.
You were supposed to have all the facts with you, right? You were supposed to know everything about what you were writing. And this was, of course, before social media came up and before social media became what it became. Now with social media, you just don't need journalists who are putting out the right information or verified information. You also need a separate category of people whose job is to only look at everything that's happening on social media and try and sift through all of these posts and see what is real and what is not. And that's a challenge just because of the volumes of content that we have on all of these platforms. I mean, just imagine any WhatsApp group that you are a part of, and just imagine the number of messages that you must be getting on that one WhatsApp. And now extrapolate that to the entire nation and different languages, different dialects. Think of the challenges that it could logistically also present. So that's absolutely. I mean, that's one aspect of it, and that's just WhatsApp, right? So then you look at Facebook, you look at Twitter, you look at YouTube, you look at Instagram. The scale that India presents even on these platforms is just too immense for it to be policed well. And by police, I mean by fact checkers, right? For them to be actually checking enough and checking constantly, which is why I feel like somewhere the responsibility is ours. I mean, as you said, we're now a nation which has the demographic dividend. We have people who are educated, especially in the metros, who are educated, who have a sense of literacy as well. And yet we just some of the most educated people I know would not hesitate before sending out fake messages or sending out disinformation on WhatsApp groups. So I'm in a WhatsApp group in my housing society, and it basically has all of these people who work in various multinational corporations and who work in public sector utility banks and all kinds of institutions, and yet they are the ones who are constantly spreading messages which have no semblance of truth in it. And it makes me wonder, what good is education if you're not wanting to apply it to things that you're sending out to so many people at one point, right? So if you have about 240 odd people in your WhatsApp group, it's almost like saying I'm ready to come in front of 240 people and say whatever I feel is comfortable. It doesn't matter if it's factual or not, right? It's essentially that, except that with WhatsApp or with phones, we're hiding behind the fact that we don't have to face them. We just virtually face them. So there's some part that fake fact checkers must definitely perform in, and I think in India, given the constraints, we have a few agencies. We have Boom, we have Alt News. We also have AFP, the global agency, which is now doing fact checks, especially on India. And we have a number of. So what's also happened is a number of news websites or news organizations who are not essentially fact checkers have also opened up smaller bureaus which basically consist of 2 or 3 people who are only fact checking things constantly. So Indian media is taking its time, but it's doing what it can. But essentially, I feel like it's people who must be responsible for the content that they're putting out. They shouldn't be putting out bullshit like a lot of the stuff that we see on our WhatsApp.
Yeah, I feel like individual responsibility is still a notion that it's going to take a while for us as a nation to grasp. And I don't mean just the more susceptible portion of the population, that being, hate to say the demographic again, but that's the one that I find more susceptible to this is, usually the 35 plus sort of people that I already described. But I often find that this is the idea of individual responsibility about propagating information to your friends and family. It's even non-existent among some of the best of the people in my age group. I'm 23 right now. So even in that age group, I'm on multiple WhatsApp groups. One of them is my acting studio's WhatsApp group. And I remember the day there were about 5 cases of the coronavirus in Mumbai. I distinctly remember someone said, guys, please be aware, don't go to Hinduja hospital. Apparently 55 people have been affected. And it was badly spaced, had no punctuations. And I remember the panic it spread on the group for about 6 people were like, oh shit, what do I do? I live nearby, blah, 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 blah. I am ashamed to admit my instant reaction was someone who I love lives close to Hinduja Hospital. I must forward it. And within a minute, I realized, holy shit, I just made the same mistake I was blaming everyone else about. And so it's like that sort of thing. There have been multiple rumors in my city today. I live in Faridabad now. I've come back from Mumbai to save myself from the whole quarantine stuff. It's better to isolate myself from my family than to die all alone. But I find that this morning and as well as yesterday, I have received 5 different messages saying that within 500 meters of my house, 3 coronavirus patients have been detected. There's rumors about someone's daughter coming from the USA, all of them unfounded. And I asked my friends to send me all the rumors they could send me. I have about 50 odd messages that originated from my city today about the virus. Almost all of them fake. That's the level we're dealing with here. And what's shocking is the establishment, despite the fact that it uses WhatsApp to propagate its own agenda in the elections, isn't doing a good job at regulating it. I mean, what did you think about the address that the PM gave yesterday? Do you think there were caveats that
I mean, so before I answer that, can you tell me more about those WhatsApp messages that you came across today?
Yeah, sure. I can actually read a couple to you. They're pretty funny. Wait. So there's one that has, if you have a nose like this, then you don't have to worry about coronavirus. And it's just like a guy's nose that has like hair coming out of his nose, like a huge amount of hair. Then there's, wait. Hey guys, it is confirmed in Faridabad. House number 589, Dangu Road. Oh, this is from Pathankot. First confirmed case of coronavirus in Pathankot today. Men 36 years came back from Germany. Parents and brothers and 2 kids also tested positive. 5 family. Please avoid this area. Pathankot lockdown by evening possible. Emergency official meeting announced. And then it just goes on and on and on. Then there's stuff from my dad's WhatsApp group that he has. So he was an engineer in BIT Sindri College, which was in Jharkhand back in the day, in the 90s. And I asked him to send me a couple of messages. So he sent me a video that basically has someone using an automated voice and saying, hi, I'm from the government. It's a cute lady. And then she goes on to talk about how, the Chinese are the goddamn problem. That's what she describes. But then she all sort of like makes it all funny and sarcastic. I think the video was meant for like people who are in the meme community to sort of get it, but it's being used as official information. Let's just say I think some people in my dad's group believe that it was propagated by the US government because she says, I'm from the government. So that's a cause of concern. And I mean, there's so many. I can go through a list, but that's the sort of stuff we're dealing with here.
But I mean, before I answer your question, I mean, what is so interesting to me also, and you see those examples that you spoke of from Pathankot, for instance. Think of what the next step is going to be, right? So we're already reading in the newspapers, and I don't know if you managed to catch this so far. But there's people are also sort of coming out and saying we'll boycott all of those people who have the virus, right? So this has already happened in Mumbai, where housing societies are saying, we're not going to let these people live here, or we're not going to let the maids who work in that building with a patient work in our building, all kinds of things. And that's my point here, that social media is only making this situation, which is already very precarious, it's making it worse by it's a cliche, but by adding fuel to the fire, right? So when things are anyway sensitive, what it does, it just gives you that platform to then broadcast whatever you have to say to hundreds and hundreds and possibly thousands of people. Now you're sitting in Bombay, there's every chance that you'd be passing it on to 3 other people, for instance, and then those people sitting in Bombay would read messages which are not even true but about Pathankot, right? And then I'll mention it to someone who I'm speaking on the phone and said, oh, I heard that there are cases in Pathankot as well. So till that circuit is actually broken by real news and verified news, it's just going to go on and on and on. And that's just the chain that it creates, right? And that chain will then lead to repercussions. So I've also, in my career, I've also covered cases where rumors on WhatsApp have led to people being lynched, people being sort of killed on the streets by mobs coming out because they read a rumor on their WhatsApp message. And my fear is that's also the direction that we're looking to go in. Where there was a video yesterday, and I don't know if you saw that from a smaller town in Maharashtra called Kunal, where this one guy was basically beaten up by a couple because he sneezed in public and he refused to wear a mask or something of that sort. And you see the panic and the fear that it's creating. And I want to say this, and this is an assumption that I'm making, but I'm pretty damn certain that it's quite the right thing to say, is that a lot of it is being fueled by social media, right from the kind of deaths that we saw. So I also have a video which is apparently from China. At least the caption said, that look at the mass burial sites in China and look at the number of people that have died. It then turned out one of the fact-checking websites did a fact-check and turned out that was from a movie called Contagion, which also talks of a similar situation. Right? Now this is what disinformation and misinformation is doing. So it's just people need to be much more conscious of what they're trying to do. And coming to your question now about the speech yesterday. Look, I'll be honest. I was hoping for something much more substantial than just being asked to go to the balcony at 5 p.m. on a Sunday and bang my pots and pans. Right. I was hoping that he would come out with a plan, possibly discuss measures that he's going to take, or measures that the government is already taking, or he would also discuss some of the things that are in store for the next few weeks, because there's just such a high level of uncertainty right now. There's also, as I said to you before the start of this recording, I told you that there are also a lot of people who are going to be missing out on their livelihoods in their businesses.
That's true.
Especially people who are earning in the informal sector, especially people who have daily wages. So they survive on that daily wage that they earn. Now, imagine if there's a complete shutdown. How are these going to people, get the money to then feed their families, send their kids to school, ensure that they are still educating their kids? So we expected that there would be more of all of that, except that there wasn't. So it seems like it was definitely a speech which meant to send out the right message that we must all be calm and yet we must all be alert. But as the Prime Minister, and as the Prime Minister who doesn't speak very often, he's not been addressing the nation all of these days while the crisis has still been brewing. As someone who doesn't speak very often, when he does speak, there are expectations that he would say something much more substantial than just get people to come together in what is essentially a feel-good exercise of sort of banging your pots and pans in your balconies, but nothing more than that. That's not. I don't think that's going to help us kill the virus, unless that WhatsApp forward turns true, where it says that Modi ji wanted to do this because the sound vibrations actually end up killing the virus. And this is an ancient Indian farming technique, which is the WhatsApp that I put up on my Twitter feed.
Yeah, I'm all in favor of sound therapy. It's a great therapy to do as a standalone practice, a secular practice. I've done sound therapy. It's fucking awesome, but that just does not make any sense. Furthermore, I think what is even more fascinating is the sort of news cycle, because you talked a bunch about how us always being on social media is propagating the fire further, is making it worse, because we wake up in the morning, we check up on coronavirus, we participate in the daily chaos and panic that is, on our Instagram feeds, on our stories, Facebook, YouTube, whatever, in an attempt to be informed and feel like something eventful is happening in the world suddenly. We're no longer just going on about our passive lives. There's one word on everyone's mouth, and it's the virus. And I'm just fascinated by two things. One, how quickly it has spread across the world, not in terms of the actual virus, but just the speed at which the information has been communicated to even tier 4 cities in India. And the second thing is, I haven't been able to find a proper resolution to consuming media at a point where the coronavirus is not the top priority of my day. Like, it's a very hard thing to sort of manage your habits and actually have like a full proper work day and let this be something that you consume 15 minutes a day just to get informed. But instead, it's this sort of 24-hour news cycle that for the first time, apart from content creators, content consumers are participating in just as much. So, I mean, what do you think about that? Do you think we'll go insane just watching people's stories on coronavirus?
I mean, look, I'm not a fan of the media, even though I am a part of the industry. I see that there's a lot that is wrong with the way the media operates, especially the television news, which I haven't watched for a few years now, I must confess. I mean, here's the thing, right? Here's as we discussed, this is something that is unprecedented, right? This outbreak that we're seeing, the fact that we mass casualties much more than what we've already seen so far, and just the uncertain nature of its spread, I think makes leaves the media with little chance but to actually just report on this constantly. I mean, you can't really blame them, because what else is, to be honest, what else is even happening in the world? We don't have sporting events, we don't have diplomatic events, we don't have conferences, we don't have travel, we have nothing. Everything is curtailed by this one bloody virus, right? So you can't really blame the media. I mean, what I would do is, definitely, if I was a news consumer who didn't have to read the newspapers or didn't check the media for my living like I do, I would have totally taken this time off and try to just focus on myself, right? I mean, in some ways, while we're all sort of at home, and we've all been asked to sort of just stay at home, this is a fantastic time, right? I mean, this is a bit like the vacation that we all want but we never get, right? And I don't mean to demean what is happening in the world, and I don't mean to underestimate the power of the virus, but I think it's also a good time to just reflect on our own lives, and just try and sort of consume things which might make us better people in the longer run, rather than being obsessed with the virus constantly. And I feel like, as long as we're taking precautions, I think it's absolutely fine to be not updated every minute of our lives with the virus. So I'd say, go. People must sort of go read books if they can. People must consume the kind of content that creators like you are putting out. A lot of other
Saying
independent
that?
creators put in brilliant content, which is not necessarily about the virus, but about life in general. And I think it's a good idea to do that, rather than just be constantly focused on the news cycle. So rather than blaming them, I'd say switch focus and do something else.
Yeah, I have a running joke with my friend that this is the time when 34-year-old Ramesh says, "Bro, मेरे को हमेशा से गिटार बजाना था. अब तेरे पास मौका है रमेश, बजा गिटार." It's that sort of idea.
Absolutely.
The many engineers and doctors who always felt like there was a better creative life awaiting them, now is a chance to do that. And yeah, I think it's a great time. What people should also be careful of is that even though you are indoors, like you said, it's very important now to readdress your relationship with technology. Because what often happens is, let's just say you have a job that lets you outside, you play sports with your friends, you go out on social outings, right? The time you spend outdoors, generally speaking, and that even though people use their phones all the time on commutes, is your screen time outside is more or less, for the lack of a better word, sort of either lessened or subsidized by the activities that you do outside. Now that people are inside 24/7, there's a couple of sarcastic tweets that I've been seeing from my friends back at Boston University who are like, "What's my schedule for the day? Wake up 9 a.m., watch my phone, 9 a.m. to 2 a.m., just watch my phone, cry myself to sleep." And I'm like, there's a lot of people who are also just using this time to just get the worst of their habits, put them in places they would not want to. And I realized that myself, before we were doing this podcast, I could just not stop looking at Twitter. And I'm like, let's just, keep updating myself constantly. And I realized I don't know how long I'm inside. It could be days if I keep doing this. And I come outside and I see the rest of my peers saying, "Oh, I learned how to, play the piano. I learned how to do this. I am a physician now." And I'm like, yeah, I just learned Twitter's algorithm works the other way around. When you do a tweet that has X, some shit like that. So my point is that it's a great time to readdress your relationship maybe with technology, maybe even like retreat inward, meditate, do all of those things that you've been pining to do all your life. But yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I'd just like to add to that, and I think that's a very crucial point, because for at least for a couple of years, I've been reporting on disinformation and WhatsApp especially. And I told you, I even went to places like Jharkhand where there have been people lynched and killed because there were rumors on the phones of villagers that these were people who had eaten beef, or these were people who had stolen cows
Right.
and were running away and killed cows and stuff. And these were people who had kidnapped someone's children. So these were the rumors that led to then those villagers rising up and killing other people. So I've seen that, and a lot of us have been talking about how it's dangerous to consume all of this information and not be conscious. And I feel like with this virus itself, we've reached a point where we're now seeing the dangers of passing on this disinformation, staring us back in our faces, right? So we now have a situation where none of these home remedies will work. Having haldi ka pani and haldi ka doodh will not work, nor will having lemon water every day in the morning, nor will standing in the sun for 2 hours work. None of this is working, right? And I think we've got enough people in enough science saying that this is all rubbish and this is all bullshit. So I think it's a good time for us to just take a moment and reevaluate what is it that we want to now put out on social media. Now that science is staring back at us and telling us this is bullshit, do we still want to continue peddling all of this in a crisis like this? This is in some ways this is one of the first globalized crises that we've seen for a very long time now. Right? You talk to your friends in Boston, and you and the friends are in the exact same situation. You can't leave home, you can't walk out, you can't take flights, you can't go to college. You're in the exact same situation. And I don't know when was the last time that it ever happened that people across borders are in the exact same position as the other ones. And I think this is a good time for us to just take a moment and reevaluate what is it that we want to put out, and be much more conscious and critical of things that we're putting out.
Yeah, it's a weird time, isn't it, man? I feel like one of those. It's like one of those Joe Rogan podcasts where you like discover that space is more than we thought, and it's just exactly like that time, except it's much more humanistic. We're realizing just how fragile we are as a species. We're realizing just how powerless we are in the face of something that's the size of a microbe, and we're also realizing the power of, apart from the divisiveness that is happening, we're also realizing the power of unity. People are rising up in solidarity like nothing else. There's the positive aspect to it as well. People are bonding together, banding together to deal with this, and it sort of reminds me of those apocalyptic. Have you seen that movie by John Cusack? It's called 2012. It's the one that came out a couple of.
Oh, no, I haven't seen it. I've definitely heard about it.
Right. So basically, any movie that's like a doomsday movie, and you see the enemies, neighbors, friends all sort of combine to save their lives. They might not agree in everyday life in their regular roles, but they have to band together now. And it's a very interesting time. I've been spending the last 2 days with my family, and it's just weird seeing now there's so much time together. So you might as well just resolve what needs to be resolved and like come together, because we don't know how bad it's going to be. So our best bet, I know this sounds cheesy, is each other. And before we get into like more sort of sappy stuff about how it's great to be a human at this point, I did want to ask you, I'd say like speculations about the world after Corona, because I was reading something by the Politico that had combined the insights of 51 abstract thinkers, macro thinkers, on what the world would look like. And the first thought that came to me organically was, many people will realize just how redundant it is to go to an office when all of it can be done online. And the second thing I thought is, so many people will also realize just how inadequate they are when they're sort of deprived of their physical workspace, and how many people will also realize that they know nothing about computers. And if stuff like this is indicative of what the future is going to be, they're going to have a hard time acquiring skills. So what do you think, Kunal Purohit? Any speculations that you have for the world after coronavirus? That's mine. What's yours?
I wouldn't say speculation, but I'm writing a piece on it. I'm writing a personal essay on this. But these particular last few weeks have made me realize, and it has just reiterated itself as to just how interconnected we all are. I mean, our generation especially, and I don't know if I can call you my generation because
How old are
you're
you?
way too. I'm 31.
You're
Turning
absolutely in
3.
my generation. Yes.
So let's say, I mean, our generation. Right? Let's for the podcast. Let's say the same generation. I mean, our generation has grown up, being isolated and feeling that we're absolutely fine being independent, right? That we don't need other people. We have our own gadgets. We have our own social media platforms. We have our profiles. We have our personalities online and all that. And all of, I mean, in this particular episode, the last 3 weeks has just brought all of that down, right? I mean, and it's actually made you realize that if it was actually only you and everything that you think you are, you'd be in a miserable state, right? You'd be locked up in a room, nowhere else to go, no one else to meet. You cannot travel, you can't take flights, you can't speak to people physically, you can't go and meet people. And I think that's the power of interconnectedness, right? So we're all interconnected, we're all interdependent, and we don't realize this till the time we're not. And we're in this position where for us in Bombay tonight onwards, our offices are shut, workplaces are shut. You have no choice but to sit at home to the 31st at least. And I think that's going to be a very good realization that we'll understand what it is like to have other people help us build our lives. Right from the guy who delivers newspapers to the guy who comes and delivers milk. Every single person has their own role to play in your life.
It's the fall of the personal ego. When you were saying it, it just went into my ears, and I'm like, you're exactly preaching to the choir. Because 2 days ago, I'd spent upward of 3 days in my apartment with the only source of human contact being my maid, who I would look forward to coming because, well, she was the only human I was seeing for the last 3 days, right? And I'm like,
Exactly.
what the fuck is happening? And just as you said, I had my online profile. It was working very well. I had a whole A5 sized vision board that I created for myself, things I wanted to do this month and the next month. And I had like these images of, like Spain and like, podcast appearance, like all of my basically desires and fantasies that are just on a board. And like before I booked my flight for Delhi to come back home, it just seemed pointless. And I called my parents. I'm like, I feel like I might come home. Mumbai is getting a bit, weird right now. And it was not as much the situation outside, but the growing loneliness about not being able to see and meet people. And I realized, fuck you, Vinamre, and fuck your massive ego around this individual that you're trying to create. All of that is great, but you're just as mortal as any of them. You need your family. It's better to, just admit it and just get back home.
And I mean, think of all the things that we take for granted all the time, right? Everything that we don't have in this particular moment is everything that we've always taken for granted and never thought twice about. I mean, you're not used to planning, for groceries to not be available for the next 2 weeks or next 10 days, or for you to be stocking up, or all of these things, right? Right from the small shop around the corner to the person who's going to come home to the people who fix your utilities for you. All of these people are just people you take for granted. I mean, and your social setup is something that you always take for granted, and that's something that we don't have. So it's going to be interesting to see how many of us also realize this, and I hope that more and more people realize that this is the fall of personal ego. Right?
Yeah. Kunal Purohit, man, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you. What a fantastic conversation. I love that.
It's absolutely my pleasure, man. Thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah. What am I saying? Where can people find you if they want to know your work?
So I mean, I'm as most journalists, I'm pretty active on Twitter. They can find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is
right?
Kunal Purohit. Yeah, Kunal Purohit, which is basically my name.
Yeah, guys, follow him. He's a verified account. I said, guys, follow him. He's a verified account. You can retweet his shit without running into trouble about it being fake. It's legit.
Yes, and I verify my information as well, which is more important to add at this point. I mean, but yeah, I mean, I put up a lot of my updates and my work updates on my Twitter profile. I'm also on Instagram at Kunal P, and that's KUNLPEA. So that's P, green peas. That's really. I mean, I'm on all of these social media platforms. But my work is also available on all of these. People will see a link to my website as well. That's where I put up my work.
Yeah, and if you could just talk about the names of your podcasts again. You have two podcasts, right? That are
Oh
already
yes, I
out.
mean, so just to quickly give people a heads up, I mean, the first one was called The Night Shift, which basically revolved around this idea that women in India, especially, have always been given a deadline of sorts, right? And they can't leave home after evening, and they can't leave home after sunset and all that. And I wanted to basically go out and find the women who are define this boundary and define this stereotype every single night. So the podcast revolves around four women in Bombay. One is a cab driver who drives through the night. One is a bouncer, so she works in a very popular club in Juhu as a lady bouncer. So she's a bouncer. The third one is a bar dancer, and she basically dances through the night in one of the city's dance bars. And the fourth one is a constable, and her job is interesting. I mean, she basically guards the ladies' compartments of all local trains in the city.
Interesting.
So yeah, so she does that. So that's the first podcast. You can look for the night shift, and you'll be able to find that. The other one is called The Last Courtesans of Bombay, and this one's really close to my heart because we're basically talking about the Tawayafs, the courtesans of Bombay. And I mean, this is a documentary style podcast again, where I'm going to the ground, where I'm basically uncovering this particular subculture, which is almost vanished from Bombay. And not a lot of people know that there are still courtesans and there are still Tawayafs in Bombay. So we try and go deep down and uncover them.
Yeah, I know. I know. We said bye. I do want to pick your brain on that a bit. I remember. Isn't Kamathipura like the biggest red light district in Mumbai first, and then second, when you say Tawaifs and courtesans are gone, I think you're saying that they're replaced by the everyday sex worker. Like, what is the difference between the sex worker and the courtesan exactly?
So I mean, this is one of the big stereotypes that have also sort of been plaguing and being affecting their reputations. Courtesans and courtesans go back in time. They go back at least 2 or 3 centuries in time. In fact, and they were basically women who were fiercely independent and who were performers. So they would be
Interesting.
poets. They would write their own songs. They would
So they're like
perform songs.
courtiers, female courtiers in a court.
Yeah, I mean, which is where courtesans is what
Right.
is
Right.
what you call it. But basically, it's just that. So they would perform, they would sing, they would dance, they would write poetry, they would write their own songs. Some of them would even be musicians. So they would also perform on musical instruments. But they were basically essentially that. They were these women, and their lifestyle was such that their sexuality was not tied down to one person. So they did not believe in conventional relationships, conventional now, but they also did not believe in the institution of marriage as well. So their lifestyle and their partners were way more fluid and way more, I mean, it used to be way more in transit. And that's really what courtesans are. Now, what has unfortunately happened is people, always sort of misunderstand them for sex workers, and people have stopped valuing the art that they bring out. So my podcast, for instance, talks about this one particular lady, and she's about 55, and she's been a fantastic poetess. I mean, she's written her poetry all her life, and she's been performing for all her life in Bombay, very close to Kamathipura, in fact, in this place called Bachu Setkiwadi. And she's a fantastic singer. I heard her sing as well. So she was a Tawayat, I mean, she was a courtesan while she was active. But people don't really value that anymore. So she's got these beautiful notebooks filled with Urdu poetry and Urdu shairi written in her exquisite handwriting. But it counts for little now. People think that she is just a sex worker. So that's really what the I mean, stories like these are what the podcast also go into. And then we try and come out with these stories and tell people just why they should be respecting courtesans much more than they are.
I find my perspective absolutely changed. I had no idea. I thought that profession had actually died. I thought it still was somehow existed in, let's just say, the bylanes of Old Delhi, because that's what you associate that with. It's very
Yeah.
interesting. I will definitely give that podcast a listen. One is called The Night Shift, about women who defy the what's what's the word?
Yeah, the gender stereotype of
No,
not leaving
not
home
just the
after
generation. I mean, they defy the deadlines. The deadlines, right? You have to be at home at certain hour.
Yes,
And then
absolutely.
the second one is called The Last Courtesans of Bombay, which makes for an epic novel title as well. I think you should write that someday. But hopefully,
Hopefully.
yeah. I think that's all for this conversation. Kunal Purohit, once again, it's been a pleasure. And
an absolute pleasure, man.
Yeah, I hope the best to you in all your work. And yeah.
Thank you so much for having me, man. Thank you so much. And I urge that you and your listeners continue to spread verified information and not add to the tsunami of disinformation that we already have in our oceans.
This is the prophecy of the journalist. Listeners, listen up.
Okay, thanks so much, man. Take care.
You.